You know, I kind of made note, and I saw that in Matt's slides. It seems to me that depending on where you're coming from on EPR, that we're all defining what it is and what's most important from the perspective of whatever chair we're sitting in. It doesn't sound to me like there is consensus about what exactly EPR is necessarily. I have my own opinion. I'm just sort of making an observation.
Thanks, Maurice. This is Matt. I just wanted to respond to what Neil just said. We view bottle bills and container deposits as a form of extended producer responsibility. These are really the godfathers and godmothers of EPR for packaging here in the United States. And we completely support them and defend them. This is a big part of what we do. And so if you think about the beverage industry, you know, for them, as Neil rightly pointed out, they have pretty much opposed container deposits, even though they invented them. They've opposed them from the get-go since these bills were starting to move forward in the 70s and 80s, and they've been incredibly successful. And so for Nestle Waters, which when I've heard this phrase of some kind of corporate juggernaut or corporate style EPR, that you have a bunch of corporations interested in controlling the recycling systems. The only corporation that we are aware of that has actually put some real money and support behind EPR for packaging is Nestle Waters North America. There is no corporate juggernaut. every other corporation is completely either opposed to EPR or is steadily on the fence, waiting to see if there's going to be enough pressure to force them to make a decision one way or the other. So with the beverage industry, you know, the only reason why Nestle Waters or even a Coca-Cola would come forward and say we would support EPR for packaging has to do with dollars and cents. They're feeling stakeholder pressure, shareholder pressure to do something about these abysmal recycling rates for PET plastic water bottles, and you know, for them, an EPR for packaging system which brings in more money from all the other consumer goods companies, not just the beverage industry, and spreads those costs out over Procter & Gamble, Unilever, all these other companies, from a per unit standpoint, is much cheaper. So, for example, in a bottle bill state like where I live in Maine, Coca-Cola, Nestle, Anheuser-Busch, they pay 3.5 cents for every unit, every container that's collected. In an EPR system that would spread the recycling costs over a much greater portion, they would pay tenths of a cent per unit of container. So that's really what it comes down to. It's a dollars and cents issue. And so, you know, I think that, you know, the bottom line is that container deposits are EPR. They're a tool to encourage the high collection and high recycling rates.
Actually, in California. Well, in California, there are advanced disposal fees because when I go buy a bottle of, you know, whatever, including bottled water, I pay a deposit. And it's a bottle deposit, it's a container deposit, and I pay it as a consumer, and then when I take it back, I get the deposit back. And the money is managed by a government agency with citizen oversight, and the producers are not involved at all. So I don't, you know, that's an advanced disposal fee, and if the producers are, and it works very well. It works very well. It works very well for tires. So I don't understand why there is a preference for forcing producers into a system that they control. One of the points Heidi Sanborn made to the Northern California Recycling Association last year was when we implement a lot more EPR, we need a lot more lobbyists. Well, hold on, you know, because the devil is in the details of constructing the laws, and the laws are very Byzantine and complex and arcane, and they're way beyond, they're going to be on a bigger stage than most citizens can possibly participate in. So, you know, if you want to keep local control and if you want to keep citizen control, an advanced disposal fee works very well. So I don't understand why we should force producers into a system where that isn't in fact necessary.
This is Neil. Just one comment on Heidi Sanborn's organization, California Product Stewardship Commission Council, and it is unfortunate she can't be here. She had another important engagement. But I just want to point out that part of the transition from what I refer to as formulaic EPR has been the developments with Heidi's group. They now are focused only on EPR for toxics. They are not dealing with EPR for products and packaging. And I think that's a very important distinction because it makes that organization an ally, whereas an organization that's trying to impose bureaucratic EPR on paper, glass, metal, etc., even organics, is incompatible with the type of grassroots-inspired recycling we have here. And I know this phrase comes into the dialogue constantly that U.S. recycling rates are stagnant. That's just not true. They're stagnant in many parts of the country, but on the West Coast, recycling is increasing every year. Massachusetts, New Jersey, these are great recycling states. And so maybe the averages are down because you've got cities like D.C. and Philadelphia and Baltimore that have very low recycling rates. But recycling is not stagnating, and the number of jobs in the recycling industry is growing very rapidly in the United States.
So I just wanted, and I appreciate this discussion and dialogue. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to have a conversation ahead of this webinar, because I feel like if everybody was able to actually have a discussion around where this evolution of EPR for packaging has gone over the last several years, there really would be no debate. I think we would all find that what we are proposing today is a shared responsibility system, which essentially looks to get producer funds that will be administered by a group of diverse stakeholders all up and down the recycling supply chain, and to go to all of the proven strategies that ILSR and many others have identified as ways to boost recycling and prevent litter. And so this is essentially, we're not talking about producer responsibility monopsonies. We're not talking about local governments having to give up control. We're not talking about recyclers having to change their business relationships with local governments so that they have to now work with a producer responsibility organization. No, this is really about getting producer funding into the system and having those funds be administered by the types of folks that are on this call: local governments, waste and recycling businesses, the end purchasers of the material. It's not, and you could even put bookends on. You could say, it's going to be $10 million a year that the producers are going to come with on themselves, and you can put bookends on the amount of money, and you can figure out how that money gets invested. For us, this is about overall recycling system optimization, and it helps. This balanced approach helps to deal with those issues around money and control that I highlighted in my presentation.
Matt, let me ask you this question, putting on your organizer's hat. I think the concern that's been expressed is based on the experience that's been seen from, as Mary Lou talked about, from what she's seen coming down from Canada in terms of what has occurred. And you have an experience from having sat in the room and talked with the corporate folks. What would you suggest would be the next step to be taken to deal with the concern that you're hearing and the people that you've talked to? How do we get to this space that you're talking about we all need to be?
That's a great question, Maurice. I really do think that this shared responsibility model, if you take a close look at the bill, it really deals with all of the concerns that have been outlined by Neil and by Mary Lou and by Dan. It is essentially a way to get that producer funding and have that producer funding shared by, have the producer funding managed by this consortium of all the different stakeholders. It doesn't change. It doesn't create a producer responsibility organization. It doesn't change the existing business relationships between local governments and the waste and recycling industry. It's fundamentally about figuring out how we get the necessary investment into the recycling infrastructure so that we can help take it to the next level.
Could I say something here?
I think the bigger issue is my question a little bit differently. What do we do next week? I understand what you're saying, what we need to do ultimately. I'm talking about what do we do next week? How do we get there from here?
Oh, I think what do we do next week is well underway, because we have mature conversations in a number of different states around the model legislation, and I'd like to see that discussion be duplicated around the country. I recently presented at the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators on the model legislation. You know, we want to have more and more conversations with local governments, with waste and recycling businesses, with recycling advocates around this idea, because we see this idea as a way to deal with the concerns, the legitimate concerns that folks have around the 100% producer financed and controlled model, which is the model that Mary Lou referenced in British Columbia. What we're talking about is something that is very, very different. And as Dick mentioned, this is really what we see as the politically viable path forward. So when you say what do we do next week, it's we have more conversations like these. We have more offline conversations, around these issues, and we roll up our sleeves and we figure out, what are the nuts and bolts types of legislation that recycling advocates, zero waste advocates can support. That's going to move the issue forward and create a big enough of a big tent coalition to overcome opposition from consumer brands. That's the bottom line.
Well, Matt, last fall you distributed a new paper as Upstream was coming out of. I guess you did away with PPI, Product Policy Institute, and it became Upstream. And you came out with a 12-page position paper that I spent quite a bit of time analyzing. And I mostly focused on the first half of it because basically it was business as usual. It was the same PPI formula that we've seen, starting with the framework, going through the principles document, which was about 2 years later, and then finally morphing into this new thing, which is supposedly the new Upstream marching orders. That was only 8 months ago. At that point in time, you were saying that you're basing everything on the idea that on EPA numbers, and you were saying that 68% of the quote waste stream is actually packaging and printed paper, which I think is false. You were saying that
we didn't say that.
Products are divided into durable and non-durable for another 28% of the supply, and then there's food scraps and lard trimmings. This is a very oversimplified version of what is out there actually to be harvested. You've basically, this organization that you're part of has consistently ignored all of the advice that you've gotten from working recyclers who really know what's on the floor of the transfer stations, because we walk on it and we pick it up and we deal with it. You've ignored all that. Now all of a sudden you've got this whole new thing, and this is yet one more whole new thing. It's been about an 8 or 10 year history of this.
Okay.
So basically, I'm just, I'm okay with that, but it's a little bit of it's a kind of a crazy making exercise to try to follow you guys.
This is Neil. If I could just stay on this topic, I'll be very brief. In a previous conversation with Dick, he impressed upon me the need for investment in infrastructure, and I think we all agree on that. But the idea that cities are prostate and cannot finance their own operations is mind-boggling, particularly when the very corporations we're talking about do not pay full taxes. They have very low tax rates. Some of them ship money overseas so they don't have to pay taxes. And when you're talking about shared responsibility, look at the Connecticut mattress EPR law. There's absolutely no way for citizen groups, for nonprofit companies that are recycling mattresses to have any say. There's a company there that the Institute's been involved with, Park City Green. They recycle mattresses. They are the tail. They cannot sit at the table with the International Sleep Products Association to determine policy or to determine anything. Now, to the credit of Heidi Sanborn at California Product Stewardship, they managed to get the California State EPR mattress law to have an advisory group of citizens and recyclers, which our organization and others are on. But that's not good enough. Citizens have to be decision makers. That's why the essence of local decision making has been critical to recycling in the last 50 years, and it's the only way it will continue. Citizen involvement, organized small businesses, and in all of the iterations of that PPI and Upstream have put forward, I see nothing allowing or calling for organized citizens to be at the table. And so I would say that that is not shared responsibility. That is cities lobbying, big corporations not paying taxes and lobbying cities that don't have money because they don't pay taxes and therefore getting their way. And that is the danger. We need citizen participation, and the EPR schemes that I've been listening to do not have any of that.
I think that's one of the problems with the concept of the managed marketplace. You know, when you're talking about a management system to rule all this money, you're talking about a managed marketplace, and the people who are going to be participating are going to be consultants and lobbyists and representatives of large industry organizations, because, you know, Dan and I are in small business, and we have been notably present on a lot of international topics and discussions, and we have run around the country, and we have financed ourselves doing that, which is very unusual for a small business to do. And sometimes it has resulted in our taking our eye off the ball of our very own business to do that. And there's a reason why you don't see very many citizens or people who are involved and heavily invested in small business participating in these kinds of oversight committees, because it's a distraction from how we make our living. So then these kinds of management committees are going to rely on the people who have enough money to go to the meetings and participate in them, and you're going to rely on people who are paid to do that. So that's a consultant or a representative of a large organizational body like a producer. And you're not going to have as much citizen participation as in your heart you want it, but it's not going to happen because the citizens can't.
Well, listen, assuming that we still need to move EPR forward and that we have to overcome that obstacle, the question is how do we move EPR forward? What I'm hearing is that Matt is saying that there is an EPR model that people need to get on board with, and I am hearing both Neil and Dan say that the EPR model does not involve the public and the players. One of the questions that I have from the audience is asking, are there any existing models of how local governments and private industries can work together and share responsibility towards a common goal, or is there a totally new path forward? I get the impression that we are at some kind of a crossroads right now in the discussion. What does the next step look like? Matt, do we need to come up with a way that sees that there is more involvement of citizens in this process? Do you think there is enough citizens' involvement in the process? What is the next step that breaks this impasse?
So I would encourage all the participants to take a look at the Delaware Universal Recycling Law, which is actually very similar to what we've proposed for this shared responsible recycling model. And so with that law, there's beverage industry funds that go through a grant process to basically build out universal recycling infrastructure and improve the recycling infrastructure throughout the state of Delaware. Those funds are administered by an organization called the Recycling Public Advisory Council, which includes the waste and recycling industry. It includes environmental NGOs. It includes a whole bunch of stakeholders up and down the supply chain that help to determine how that funding gets distributed. Now, there are public hearings on how the funding gets distributed. There's all kinds of opportunities for public input through that process. Now, what we don't like about that bill is that the beverage industry funding sunsets. It was part of this, really unfortunate grand bargain that was made with the beverage industry when they undid their bottle bill, which was the weakest bottle bill in the U.S. And so, from our perspective, that funding needs to continue in perpetuity. And so, that's a model that has been proven to work today. And so I would encourage all of you to take a look at that. What we're proposing is something that's very similar. You would have a sustainable packaging authority that would receive producer funds, and those funds could be used to boost recycling performance across the state. There is no producer responsibility organization. There's no producer consortium that's dictating market prices and that's changing business relationships with existing participants. It's purely a way to get producer funding into the recycling system and have that funding, have the control over that funding shared among local stakeholders. I mean, it really meets the core issues that I've heard from Mary Lou, from Dan, and from Neil today. And so, rather than waste your time attacking me and attacking upstream, I would really encourage you guys to roll up your sleeves and find the models that you can support, because this is an opportunity that is going to go away if we don't figure out how to come together as a community and move forward.
So then, Matt, what you're saying is that there's already an answer there that we need to look at it. Listen, I have a response from the audience that says that the Michigan Delaware law was incorrectly characterized the funding as coming from the industry, that in fact the funding comes from a fee on beverages. Maybe you can correct this, which is paid for by the consumers and collected by the retailers, not the distributors. At the root of the law was the repeal of a producer-funded beverage container deposit law. This was the first and only repeal of an EPR law in the U.S., and that there is a publications page and fact sheet that explains this. I will make sure that you get this so that maybe you can either explain or correct this for us.
Yeah, I'm happy to explain that. I mentioned that in my comments. It was part of a grand bargain that undid unfortunately the weakest bottle bill in the U.S. And this is, again, something that we would never advocate that you should trade away bottle bills in favor of something else. But the process that resulted from that about these fees, that's correct, on beverage containers going to a fund which was administered by the State Department in consultation with this Recycling Public Advisory Council, that is working, and that is something that we believe should continue in perpetuity. And again, it shows that you can have a situation where producer fees, where fees on packaging materials can be administered by a group of stakeholders to help boost recycling across the jurisdiction. And yes, that unfortunately came at the loss of a bottle bill, but you don't have to do that. You can do that in places that don't have bottle bills. You can even do that in places that do have bottle bills without undoing the bottle bills.
Maurice, my answer to the question.
PPI defined EPR as PPI, back when it was still existing, took very great pains to say that bottle bills were not EPR.
That's not true.
Oh, no, it is true.
That's not true.
Well, I think so.
That is not true, Dan. Not at all, not ever.
Well, thank you. I will show you chapter and verse in your own framework and the principles that followed the framework.
Well, you guys need to remember one thing about bottle bills. They're very good, they work great, but one of the reasons they work so well is that they give the consumer money when they come back to the depot. Yeah. If you could do that with other products so that every time I took something to a depot or put it out in the blue bin, I got money back, you could really boost recycling. But in that sense, what I'm saying here is the bottle bills are themselves unique because the consumer is motivated by money. For many of the other products, this is not going to happen.
Well, that's one of the points of having advanced disposal fees for a lot of products, because then you can motivate people with money for a lot of things.
Mary Lou, you'd have to give the consumer money back on the ADF. In other words, you have to charge. The ADF has to be large enough to A, give money back, and B, actually pay for the recycling. That might be a way to organize it, because it does motivate people to bring things back to a depot. But you do have to remember that the ADF has to be large enough to pay for the recycling.
No, because recyclers can still sell the materials for some revenue.
Yeah, and that works if things are brought to a depot. But when you're talking about a system like that, which works fine in many cases, you're forgetting that you're forgetting the role of government, of local government and their contractors, which is actually to collect recyclables from residential locations, and that's the most expensive part, which is not paid for at all, actually, by the value of the materials.
No, that would have to be funded.
Maurice,
the collection is a separate issue.
It's not a separate issue. It's a fundamental cost, and right now it's a cost borne by local ratepayers, and what level of recycling we can achieve with local ratepayer funds. In many parts of the country, this is pretty low.
Okay, Neil, what did you want to say?
Maurice, I wanted to answer your question on what we should do now, and I will in 30 seconds, but I want to point out that the American recycling movement after World War II is unprecedented. Citizens mobilized starting around 1968. We went from 2 or 3% recycling to, I would say, about 50% now, if you include C and D. It's been a tremendous advancement, over 1 million jobs, etc. Why not continue to do what we're doing? The answer is more source separation, EPR for toxics, bans on products that cannot be reused or recycled, bottle bills that require refillables, which are the cheapest and most environmentally sound way. So my response is do what we've been doing that got us to this tremendous success. In fact, the Institute's claim to fame is that when industry said in the 80s that you couldn't recycle more than 10%, we argued. Brenda Platt wrote the book Beyond 20%, beyond 25% when they said you couldn't go beyond 25, and then they said you couldn't do more than 40. She wrote Beyond 40%, and finally she wrote the 50% volume, and we stopped because things keep on getting better and better. So the phenomenon that we're seeing, which is cross-racial, cross-income, cross-gender, cross-age, everybody wants to recycle, and the investment in more investment in recycling will get us to the 90%, along with getting rid of toxics and banning products that don't contribute anything to our well-being, such as polystyrene, plastic bags, and so on and so forth. So let's keep doing what we're doing. If we need to raise money for it, there's no problem.
Just tell me shortly where you want to get the increased investment in recycling. Where are you going to get it?
Surcharge on landfills, national or local or state. They've worked before. Increased taxes on corporations to pay their fair share, and mandatory product design to consistently reduce materials and impact. All of these things are being done now. Industry
none of the things you listed are in fact available to cities legally. It's the state level or national level.
Surcharges on. Well, yes, they are surcharges. Surcharge. Gary Liss has been arguing for a surcharge in California or a national surcharge, as they have in England. I believe it's $40 or 40 pounds per ton. That creates a vast investment strategy. It worked in Champaign-Urbana. It worked in Boulder, Colorado, where they had sunset surcharges. They got their investment. They built their systems. You have to look at the California bottle bill as an investment program, because money's collected by the bottle bill go to support go to support recycling, job training, etc. And of course, then there's the example of Alameda County, Stop Waste, which in 1988, I believe, passed a surcharge after the citizens defeated an incinerator. They wanted to solve the problem, so they passed a surcharge, and Stop Waste has been funding city programs, private programs, and community programs for years. It's not in this country. It's not a question of capital. If you want to go and beg money from the giant corporations, that's one thing. But why not use democracy to make them pay their fair share and avoid them having to take over our entire recycling system, which has been a boon to the U.S. economy and to the U.S. environment and also to the U.S. psyche. It's shown environmentalists that you can make fundamental change and move forward. Not very many other environmental areas can say this.
Alameda County's surcharge was the result of a citizens initiative, which California has the capability to do. Dan and I worked on that initiative, and the landfill surcharge was challenged as an unpermitted tax, but the California Supreme Court ruled that it's not a tax, it's a user fee, and now Alameda County still implements that surcharge on every ton landfilled, and it has millions of dollars a year to invest in recycling infrastructure.
And here's what the framework, the original PPI framework says about financing. Producers finance their stewardship programs as a general cost of doing business through cost internalization or by recovering costs through arrangements with their distributors and retailers. End-of-life fees are not allowed.
Yeah. End-of-life fees, what they're trying to disincentivize is the charge of fees that discourage consumer participation. So when we had computer fees, you have to when you dropped off your computer here in Maine before the EPR law, and you had to pay $25 or $30 to drop off your computer, that disincentivized people from dropping off their materials. And we found a lot of computers and televisions on the side of the road, in streams, in dumps around the state. Now you don't see that anymore, because when you go to the transfer station, it's free. The charge is included. It's part of the price of doing business here.
Yesterday when we took our hazardous materials, which are some of them I suppose covered by some EPR thing or other, we still ended up paying $900 and some odd by category, and there were about 10 categories of material, including mercury, by the way, which any recycler will get from time to time. So, these things, the disposal service fee is really essential.
It's a disincentive.
And it's paid on all sorts of levels.
I agree with Matt. And Dan, I know that you took a whole variety of electronics to that disposal site. And we don't cover all electronics up here under the EPR law.
I don't think there were any electronics in this.
No, actually, we get paid for a lot of our electronics as it's called.
What material? And well, anyway, then specifically with regard to mercury-containing lighting, here you would have been able to drop that off for free.
Well, not here. So
you need some
have an EPR law
changes down there.
Well, if there's an advanced disposal fee and consumers pay 50 cents and get back 25, then they will have that financial incentive.
So I just wanted to, and I know we're getting an hour and a half here, and I appreciate everybody staying on. I think we've still got 30 participants, which is great. But I just want to respond to Neil just real briefly and say, the bill that we've proposed in the evolution of EPR for packaging in my presentation that we proposed is about getting corporations to pay their fair share. And that's fundamentally what it's about. And so all of the things that you outlined that you care about, you can find a space for that in the bill that we've developed, because it is a completely different bill than what was proposed several years ago and what was proposed in British Columbia. This is an evolution. That's why my presentation was called The Evolution of EPR for Packaging. And I think that if Mary Lou and Dan, if you guys have time to look at what we're proposing and understand what it actually does, I think you'll see that it takes care of the vast majority of your concerns. And for the ones that it doesn't take care of, we're very interested in learning how we can do that. So let's work together on this instead of, just coming out here and taking pot shots at something that you guys haven't even really looked at.
These aren't pot shots, man. These are facts. I mean, the fact is that Sweden, which invented EPR, has 30 incinerators burning half of its trash and claiming that it has the best waste management system in the world. Germany has 80 incinerators. Northern Europe has 220 incinerators. BC is being besieged by incinerator vendors trying to sell incineration into a province that has, at least until a couple or 3 years ago, was the poster child for PPI's approach to EPR. So, you know, you guys are morphing, that's fine. Maybe we can figure out some way to work together. I'm happy with that.
I think that
I am too, Matt. And if I could just say, Maurice, I suggest that we have another discussion on the Delaware bill and the other bills. Certainly, we want to work with you, Matt. But I think we're not taking pot shots. Where we have about 150 years experience here. We've been through a lot. We know a lot. And our positions are very well founded. There's disagreement, but as you say, we're coming together and perhaps looking at the Delaware bill and the bill you're proposing in a public forum would be another good next step. But we are not taking pot shots.
Yeah.
Right.
I also think that, you know, I don't want us to keep rehashing the issues. I mean, what I am hearing Matt say is that he would like to try and move us forward. He's taken what he has written. He's tried to incorporate things he's heard from before, and take us to a different place. Perhaps we need to take him at his word. It's about 5:39. I think perhaps we should look to try and wrap up our webinar for today. I think this has been a very productive conversation. I certainly hope that we can pick this up and continue the conversation offline. I personally hadn't been as much involved in this conversation until you guys asked me to be involved in the subject. Philadelphia is rewriting its 10-year plan now, and the recycling director in Philadelphia, Phil Briget, wrote down that he wanted to see this as part of the strategies he wants us to discuss. People didn't even know what it meant here. So I appreciate this discussion and look forward to taking the information from this discussion to Philadelphia. Are there any last comments that everybody would like to make in closing here?
I would just like to ask Rebecca if she could share with eventually, not necessarily now, all the questions that have come in so all the panelists could see them and get back to people offline if they choose to.
Yes, I definitely will be doing that. And I was going to mention that I'll send out the questions, and I'll also be sending out the recording after I get that edited and put that out there for all of the participants, including those people who couldn't be here today. And if you have any other questions or you'd like to get in contact with any of our panelists, shoot me an email. Again, my email is rebecca@ilsr.org. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.